Welcome back, everyone. Today we're doing a follow-up video to the last video that I put out regarding Halo Infinite and just kind of some of the thoughts and feelings I was having on it. I wanted to do a longer form video and just kind of expand upon my thoughts regarding the game as a whole, just because, kind of like I said, regarding some of the blue team stuff and how the microtransactions are being handled currently for the game. I think it's important to continue the discussion on just where Halo Infinite is at as a whole. Just hopefully that way we can see the series succeed in the future and hopefully, return to its former glory. So real quick, I just want to put out that I have been a Halo fan ever since Halo 1 on the original Xbox. Some of my earliest memories of this series and that were, playing like Assault on the Control Room, Two Betrayals, The Maw, just all those classic levels over at my grandmother's house with one of my cousins and that. From the moment I played it, I quickly got hooked on it. Pretty much switched over from being a Nintendo kid to wanting to have an Xbox, and the year Halo 2 had come out, that Christmas I was able to finally get an Xbox along with Halo 2, and I pretty much have been a fan right from the beginning. Of course, the first game I actually owned in the series was 2, but they'd go back to buy one. Actually have bought one at least 2 or 3 times. Well, 3 if you count the original, but I did also buy the PC port of it, just because at the time where I grew up, we did not have access to high-speed internet for a good chunk. So I was a bit of a dial-up demon on Halo PC, and then as soon as I could get Xbox Live, which was right around whenever Halo 3 dropped, immediately switched over to that. Now, I say all that just not because I feel like because I've been around from the beginning, that therefore my opinion holds more weight than somebody who maybe got into the series with like Halo 3 or Halo Reach. I say it just because I've been around for a lot of the highs and a lot of the lows of the franchise, and trust me, there's some really high highs and unfortunately some very low lows. One of the other things that I want to throw out is kind of later on in that, when I talk about 343 or Halo Studios, pretty much the same thing. I don't care if you do a name rebranding. It's the same group of people. A lot of the negativity that I'll be throwing out, I just want to make it clear that that's not towards the regular employees, the people that were coming in, busting their ass to try and give us some good content and pretty much bring the game to its full potential. I'm not talking about them. It's mostly going to be towards the leadership, or rather the lack of quality leadership, and how it's negatively impacted the game. But really, before we get in too much into Halo Infinite, I think it's actually important to kind of back up for a moment and talk about how I felt going into it, and I think Halo 5 is a perfect starting point for that. So maybe a little bit of a controversial take. I know sometimes opinions tend to get better as time goes on. But I was someone from the get-go that really, really loved Halo 5. And I want to be clear, that is specifically the multiplayer of it. I am a big fan of the campaign. I would actually say I'm probably a bigger fan of the campaign than the multiplayer. For the franchise, that is, not that specific game. But I was sorely let down with the campaign of Halo 5. However, in terms of the multiplayer, it was probably the most fun I had had in Halo since Halo 3. For those of you that know, with Halo Reach, the series kind of experimented around with how to bring in some more modern gaming mechanics into the series, and I will be honest, I wasn't a big fan of how they tried to implement them in Reach, and I also think that, for what it's worth, while 4 did make some steps in the right direction, it also took a lot of steps back as well. And 5 is where I think they really nailed the perfect balance of trying to bring it into more of a modern era. Now, there are a lot of people who really love Halo 5 and will swear by it. I'm personally one of them. There are also some people that despise it. And honestly, I totally get it. I think it's a very divisive entry in the series. But I talk about it just because at that point in time, I was feeling really good about the multiplayer and had, hopes that the campaign could get back on track. I thought there were some interesting ideas explored in Halo 5, but they just never implemented them very well. So I was kind of hoping that with, feedback from the community, that we would be entering a point in time where, it was only going to be up, and I was hopeful that whatever Halo 6 would be, that, it was going to return the series to its former glory that really it had been struggling to obtain since pretty much Halo 4 had dropped. But yeah, I felt that, Halo 5, for what it was worth, I really, really enjoyed the multiplayer. Campaign, wasn't a big fan of it, but I was still in a spot where I was feeling incredibly hopeful. Now, one thing I will also throw out is a lot of the marketing regarding Halo Infinite, and even with 5 and 4, truthfully, I really did not pay a lot of attention to it. I did remember seeing the initial kind of reveal trailer, and I did get extremely excited about it, but other than that, I really did not look further into it. Immediately, one of the things I was happy to see was the kind of Bungie era art style was making a return. Now, I do think that 343 has had some decent art pieces here and there. I don't think it's all bad like everybody likes to say, but when it comes to stuff like the elites, the grunts, just the old designs, they were so much better. I mean, I respect them, for trying to do their own take on it, but sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So to see them go back to it, the old kind of classic but modern version of Master Chief's Mjolnir armor, I was feeling really, really good. Plus, on top of that, it looked like it was going to kind of be a game that was going to harken back to some of the earlier entries in the series, and so it's feeling incredibly optimistic. I thought, all right, this is going to be the 343 game that, is finally going to pull everyone back on board and make Halo great again. I know that might be a very controversial phrase in today's climate, but that was honestly my thoughts. After some time in that, I do know that there was an E3 trailer that was, or not an E3 trailer, but kind of like gameplay that was dropped, and unfortunately, due to the graphics, it wasn't very well received. Now, I didn't pay too much attention to it. I heard that the game was going to be postponed for a little bit of time, which to me I was fine with. I kind of figured, like, hey, if they are willing to go back and work on something because it's not up to par with what the community wants, more power to them. I'd rather them put that time in, give us a quality product, than sit there and just get something rushed out to hurry up and make a lot of money. From there, really just kind of let it be. Once it was available for pre-order, did pre-order it, and just kind of figured, like, hey, I'm just going to kind of wait around for this to be a thing, and hopefully when it comes out, I'll enjoy it. So I believe it was maybe 1 or 2 weeks before the game itself had actually dropped. They went ahead and they made the multiplayer free, so you could instantly get right into it. To be 100% honest, I chose not to, just because I kind of figured, I really want to experience the campaign. I'm also currently having fun with my friends on some other games. Like, I'll just wait for the full game to come out, and I'll experience it from there. Now, I did hear a lot of positive reviews of the multiplayer at that time. One of the things that got me really excited was a lot of people were making comparisons to Combat Evolved, which I had put an ungodly amount of time in, just because it was the only Halo game I could play online for a while, just due to being stuck with dial-up. So at that point in time, again, I was feeling just incredibly hopeful, and I could not wait for the drop date. And to be honest, when Halo Infinite came out, I was excited. I was feeling really, really good, and immediately jumped into the campaign, and it kind of rekindled that love of the franchise for me. Now, one of the things that I will say is my initial impressions of the campaign were incredibly good. There were definitely some things that, you know, looking back nowadays, I would have probably viewed as red flags. But I think because it was just so much of an improvement over 5, I was definitely a little blind to a lot of that stuff. But overall, like I said, I really enjoyed the campaign for what it was worth in that. I thought the open world setup was really, really cool. And just being able to get around and explore like a Halo ring as Master Chief in a way that we had never gotten to before, I was in heaven. I was in heaven and I was loving it, and I think I probably beat the campaign in 1 or 2 sittings, especially because at the time, you know, with COVID going on, stuff like that, I was working from home, so it was very easy to just transition right over to, I'm going to pick this up and we're going to have a couple-hour gaming session. Once I had finished up the campaign, immediately went over to hop into multiplayer. Like I said, I was going in there with the idea that this is going to be on par with like Halo 1. It should harken back to that a lot. And I'm not going to lie, first impression of it was not that great. My immediate thought was, you know, the people that were making the comparison to Halo 1, I was legitimately questioning if they had ever played Halo Combat Evolved. Something just did not seem off. And for me, the multiplayer, once I entered that realm, that's really where I started to see a lot of chinks in the armor for this game. So kind of like in my last video, you know, I talked a lot about the microtransactions, and that to me was one of the first big flags that something wasn't exactly right with this game. So Halo has always been a game that was known for its customization, even very early on. And to see a lot of that stuff get locked behind a battle pass or a paywall, I was pretty upset by that. You know, in my mind, I was kind of thinking, okay, it's very early, you know, maybe they'll add more stuff, and, you know, if they keep pumping out these battle passes, especially if they're free, we'll be able to get, you know, some decent cosmetics. And I will say, like, there is definitely a lot more content currently with the game in terms of customization compared to when it first dropped. However, compared to other Halo games, I felt that it was pretty abysmal. On top of that, a lot of the armors that I did think, you know, hey, that looks really, really cool, I'd love to, you know, rock that. It was all locked behind paywalls, and honestly, I just kind of felt that the stuff that I was interested in was all going right towards the shop. There was no way for me to earn it, whether that be, you know, doing something in-game or grinding a battle pass. It was all locked behind a paywall, and I understand that, you know, the multiplayer was released free. However, it was released free probably after a lot of people had already made, you know, the decision to pre-order it or had spent $60. You know, Halo does have a very passionate campaign audience, and to kind of see them, you know, from the get-go adopt the kind of like free model, especially in the multiplayer, I was not thrilled with, because like I said, you know, I bought the game, and really I kind of felt like at that point all I'm getting is just a campaign for $60, which, don't get me wrong, like I said, I did enjoy the campaign. Do I think it was worth $60 even with my positive initial impressions? Absolutely not. But yeah, so some of the other things that immediately stuck out to me were, well, I did like some of the mechanics. Again, I don't think comparing them to Halo 1 was maybe the best idea, but on paper it sounded pretty good. My big problem, or one of my problems, was that a lot of the maps that initially came out, and I would say really a lot of the maps that have been released since. Now, I want to preface, though, I'm not talking about the Forge maps that made it in, because the Forge community has pretty much been single-handedly carrying this game at this point. Like, those guys are incredible. I do have a very love-hate relationship with this game, and it's not uncommon for me to take very extended breaks. But whenever I do come back, I'm going to be honest, it's not because of anything 343's dropped. It's because the Forge community has busted out something amazing. Like currently, as you can see me playing Firefight Classic. I think it's phenomenal that that's finally here. Shouldn't have taken this long. But I know that's not the Forger's fault. That's 343's. But anyways, the maps I wasn't exactly thrilled with. The other thing that I really started to notice at that point was we had lost quite a bit from the sandbox going from Halo 5 to Infinite. In terms of some of the newer weapons that were added, I'm going to be honest, even currently, I wouldn't say I'm crazy about any of them. And a lot of the ones that we lost, what they were replaced with, I wasn't thrilled about it. You know, the brute spike launcher, I'm trying to remember what it's called at this point just because it's been a hot moment since I've touched it, but to me I didn't see a reason why we couldn't have like the fuel rod gun in the game, and that as well. Like it's been a staple ever since the original. You know, why did we have to surrender so much of the sandbox and essentially trade it in for stuff that just really did not feel all that interesting? So at that point, one of the other issues that I had with the game is the crossplay. So to be flat out honest, I do play pretty much exclusively on Xbox. I have played a lot of PC games in the past, but just because a lot of my friends were on console, a lot of the games I was loving were on console, I eventually did make that transition just fully over to that part. Now, I understand that crossplay, it's got its pros and cons. I love the fact that, you know, we're not always necessarily prevented from playing with our friends in that just because maybe they own different hardware than what we do. I think it's phenomenal. However, there are definitely a lot of cons to it. And I think this game was kind of built around the PC in that. And I do think the Xbox version of it suffers. On top of that, in you know, an environment where gaming has become hyper competitive, a lot of those small little benefits to the PC in that, they do make an advantage. And you know, with how skill-based matchmaking is set up in that, a lot of times that can, you know, it can be extremely frustrating on the console. Not saying that, you know, all PC players in that are going to stomp you. You know, you still have to be a good player. But with like refresh rates, you know, better FPS, less input lag, it definitely felt like a lot of times I was facing an uphill battle. Now, simply, if I would have just had the option to turn off crossplay, it really wouldn't have been a big issue. However, we didn't have that. The only thing that you could do was change up the controller input initially. I don't even know if that's a feature really anymore, even in ranked. But that was kind of one of the big things. You were locked into playing with people, and there were just a lot of times where stuff did not feel fair. The other big problem too is, of course, with a lot of other free multiplayer games, you get a fair bit of cheaters. And again, you know, I've definitely run across my fair share of cheaters, especially early on. That was one of the other big things that really made me put the game down for a while. Again, it's not all players, but I did notice that there was a suspicious amount of them that whenever I would go to like report them or something like that, pull up their gamer tag and what system are they playing on? PC. Again, I'm not saying that all PC players do it, and I'm not saying that all console players do it. However, I will say that with a lot of games that I have played, when I am only playing it with console players or I have the ability to disable crossplay, I don't seem to run into it as much. And I do think that's just because modding and stuff like that, it's a lot, it's a big part of PC gaming culture, and honestly, it's really cool. Like, I did do a lot of modding with, you know, Halo Combat Evolved when it first came out. But I think there's a difference between modding and cheating, but I think sometimes a lot of the people who get involved with it, there is some overlap. And after maybe like 100 or so games, like I really did try to give it an honest, just an honest playthrough. I was really disappointed with the campaign and just did not feel that I was having a good time like I had with other games. I would say probably one of the other things too that I noticed, especially playing on controller, and this also does affect PC players as well that play on controller, is I don't think this game was really optimized the best for it. I know aim assist is once again one of those things where you can spark a whole debate with it, but I think there is a reason for it. If you are playing mouse and keyboard, you're able to use your full arm, you have a full range of motion. On controller, you're just limited to 2 thumbsticks. And a lot of times aim assist is there to help make up for the fact that you can't make those precise judgments. For whatever reason, in Halo Infinite, it feels like aim assist really only kicks on once your crosshairs are on somebody, but because it also feels like the control, or excuse me, the thumbsticks are a little sensitive in that, sometimes it feels like, hey, you're just trying to naturally track a target, but your thumbstick will accelerate, way off the player, and all of a sudden you start really missing shots. For me, it's not something that I notice from further ranges. In fact, I would actually say a lot of times I feel like kind of have a bit of an advantage over mouse and keyboard, but whatever it is about the aim assist, especially in a lot of close range engagements, which, a lot of the early maps were more geared towards that, there were just so many times where had I been playing a past Halo game, it would have been easy to stay on target, but now I just felt like, doing something that I would do not just in Halo, but in like other games like Call of Duty and that, I was almost being punished for trying to track the target and not letting the aim assist do all of the work. But even then, like I said, it was really only once your crosshairs were on, it would kind of help it stick on, but if you just move slightly off whatsoever, it completely disappeared. Anyways, though, so after trying to give it a fair shake and just not feeling happy, I kind of figured, you know what, that's okay. I'm just going to go back, going to achievement whore the hell out of the campaign, and then hopefully, they start fixing stuff and things start to improve. Again, this is kind of where I started to notice that, things really were not as good as what they had thought. And also want to keep in mind that at this time, we were kind of all under the impression that, this was going to be the Halo game for the next 10 years, and that there was going to be a lot of content. So even though I do feel the campaign to Infinite is better than Halo 5, again, that's really not a high bar to pass. Some of the things, though, that I did start to notice were that it wasn't as good as I initially kind of thought. And I think a lot of it was I was just going in incredibly optimistic. And, going through that second playthrough where you are a little bit, the honeymoon phase is over, stuff like that, you do start to kind of notice some of the downsides. So in terms of the campaign, I think it's kind of biggest thing, for me at least, is I just wasn't really as invested in the story as I thought I initially had been. The other thing too is I think there was every chance for the campaign to be absolutely phenomenal, but for whatever reason, 343, whether it be with Halo 5 or Halo Infinite, they do a whole lot of just telling instead of showing. So, Halo Infinite, it opens up with, and it is a really, really cool scene. You're watching the Master Chief, he's on the Infinity, and you're fighting, Atriox, you're having this battle, and for once we kind of see the Chief, he loses. Atriox does get the better of him. And, for me personally, I was like, dang, I really can't wait to go back for round 2 with this guy. But as soon as you start playing the game, somehow it's kind of inferred that, Atriox has already been defeated off screen. 6 months have passed. There's now this new guy, Escharum, that's kind of taken over for the Banished. And I just wasn't really super crazy about that. You know, they had really set up Atriox and his group of Banished to be like the main enemies in the game, and the Banished were. But it just kind of felt like something was unresolved with, you know, Atriox. Like I wanted to get my just desserts with the man. The other thing, though, that was pretty apparent was pretty much everything that had gone on in Halo 5 that we were working to complete had pretty much all been wrapped up off screen for us, which was also kind of a letdown. Now, again, I'm not saying that, you know, the story that Halo 5 was trying to tell was the best. However, just because it wasn't the best, I didn't feel like it just all needed to be completely abandoned. And again, all off screen, only to really be figured out through books and other media. Now, I'm okay with other forms of media in that, being a part of any gaming universe. But I think it should be something that helps build onto and doesn't take the place of something else. So I think a good example of this is actually when you look at Halo Combat Evolved and then you look at Halo 2. So yes, at the end of Halo 1, technically the book First Strike comes into play. That being said, though, I did not read First Strike until after I had played Halo 2, but never at any point did I sit there and think to myself, like, geez, I wonder how Master Chief got here. You know, Halo 1 ended with the Chief being in the longsword, and you could kind of imply that, you know, hey, he's in a spaceship. He's eventually going to come back into contact with humanity, and so, like, especially being young, it was very easy to rationalize, like, okay, he took this ship, got back into, you know, UNSC controlled space. That's that. Nothing wild. Even the same thing with going from Halo 2 to Halo 3. Is there stuff that happens in between it? Absolutely. But the last thing that we see with the Chief is, you know, he's on Truth and Reconciliation, and Halo 3 starts off with the Chief's, you know, falling in from orbit. So again, it was kind of something where, like, even if you didn't know the exact specifics of it, it at least made enough sense to follow, and you weren't really questioning, like, how did we necessarily get here? Again, with Halo Infinite, we didn't have that. It just kind of really felt like we had put all this time and effort into telling one story just for it to be finished off screen. And, you know, the way it was wrapped up in that, I can't even fully say, just because I haven't bothered to read any of the books. It left a really bad taste in my mouth. But again, this has kind of been something that's been pretty consistent for 343. You know, if you look at Halo 4 and Spartan Ops, Jul 'Mdama was being set up to be, you know, the next big threat. He had kind of like reunited some of the remnants of the Covenant. And within the first mission of Halo 5, you know, this big baddie that we had spent kind of years at this point building up through Spartan Ops, and that literally just dies in the first mission. The other big thing too is that I noticed with the campaign was whenever I did go back to replay it, I was kind of stuck in the open world. You know, for those of you that did play the campaign, especially early on, you may have remembered that something as simple as replaying your favorite mission, you couldn't actually do that. Well, you could, but you would have to replay the campaign from the beginning just to get up to the point that you wanted to replay, and then you could replay it. It wasn't until later that we actually got that, you know, very basic ability to go back and replay parts, and to me that was just unacceptable. The other thing was, as much as I did like a lot of the scenery that was going on and stuff like that, I quickly noticed that once I had completed like all the little outposts, defeated all the like higher up Covenant bosses, stuff like that, a lot of this big open world, it was also empty. And there really weren't too many spots within the campaign in that where it really deviated from the setup that we got. And like I said, at this point, you know, I was still under the impression that, hey, there's going to be campaign DLC. The game's just not in a good spot right now. That happens. We'll come back in a little bit. We'll see if things are in a better spot. And unfortunately, when I came back from the little break that I had, my eyes had been opened pretty quick that this was not the game that we were going to, or that we were promised. So, for starters, campaign DLC had pretty much been dropped, which I was extremely disappointed in, especially because, too, you know, so much of Infinite's campaign is built around the idea of hyping up the Endless. You know, there's supposed to be this threat that's more dangerous than the Flood. And never at any point in the game did I think they remotely came close to it. You know, you have the Harbinger, and it was just kind of like, okay, this is supposed to be the leader of this group, but I'm not really seeing anything that makes them this big threat. I mean, remember, for the Flood and that, the Forerunners actually had to go out and build the Halo rings. You know, the Flood was literally so dangerous that the Forerunners kind of thought that, you know, hey, the only way to really beat them is you got to destroy all sentient life in the galaxy just to starve them. Like, we literally got to put every species in the galaxy on a respawn timer. Never once did I feel that, you know, the Harbinger or anything of the Endless were going to remotely be on that level. And then again, you know, it was kind of through some other stuff that it's inferred, like, oh, the reason that they're such a big threat was because, you know, they were immune to the Halo rings. Okay, that's fine. And, you know, the way that the Forerunners decided to handle that was just in case the Flood wouldn't develop that immunity was, you know, they locked them away. Again, fine, but, you know, we're not the Forerunners, we're humanity. Why have us, you know, be the, or, you know, why immediately have them side with the Banished, other than simply the fact that they awoke them? Like, you know, if the Endless were there during the original, you know, kind of Forerunner and all that, I'm sure they would have had some interaction with species. You would kind of think that, you know, hey, the Brutes, a group of aliens that are just incredibly self-destructive, or humanity, something that was able to rival the Forerunners and try to take on the threat of the Flood for what they were. Again, just stuff like that. The other thing, too, is a lot of the multiplayer stuff in that, we weren't really receiving a whole lot of support from 343. Again, a lot of it was just kind of being thrown to the Forge community, and it was really the Forgers that were keeping this game alive, and still to this day are really the ones keeping everything up and running as well as what it is. But not only that, but we also saw that we would be getting less and less content, it felt like, every time we got an update. And this was for a game that was already content starved. I mean, we just got Assault. I mean, this game is, what, going on 4-5 years old? And we just got that. Something that has been in, you know, most base Halo games. Or at least, you know, if it wasn't in the base game, there was usually something there to try and take its spot. We did not get any of that in Infinite. And for as old as this game is, for us to just finally be getting stuff years later, that's just fucking unacceptable. Because I feel like, honestly, most of 343's work has been towards stuff in the shop. And again, this is, you know, this is leadership's fault. This isn't, you know, the average Joe who's just trying to sit there, do his job, anything like that. The fact that 343 was more worried about putting shit in the shop for people to buy versus making a quality product, it's just beyond fucking unacceptable. But it's not just the fact that, you know, we weren't really getting any quality maps from them, but it was also stuff that we really didn't see any big additions to the sandbox. So as it stands right now, we've gotten 3 new weapons, and I hesitate to say 3 new weapons. I really like to say 1 new weapon and then 2 reskins, because let's be honest, the Bandit, which honestly should have been in the base game in that. I mean, the DMR, which this is essentially kind of, you know, the spiritual successor to that. It's been in Halo games ever since it was introduced in Reach. Like, why was it such a big thing to, you know, release this? But at least I give them credit for it because it is a unique weapon. It has unique animations, everything like that. The The MA5K assault rifle is essentially just a kit bash of the regular AR, and that just to kind of function more as an SMG. Uses the same reload animation, everything like that. So they were able to shortcut putting one weapon together. Then we get a fuel rod rocket launcher, which is interesting, don't get me wrong. But at the same time as well, like, why couldn't we just have gotten the regular fuel rod gun? Honestly, the answer is just because they decided that it was so much easier to reuse assets. They already had the rocket launcher. They could just copy the animations and everything. Why not just do the, you know, why not take the easy way out? And I think that's been like the big thing for me in that is the stuff that 343 does give us that they allow their workers to release. It feels like they picked the stuff in that was at the bottom of the barrel. Like, there are talented people that work for that company that if you were just allow that, or yeah, if they would just allow them to, you know, do their job and actually release the stuff that they bust their ass to make in that, I think this game would be in such a good position. But again, like, it shouldn't be on the Forge community to bring us Firefight. Like, this should be something that, honestly, if it wasn't in the base game, year one. But for whatever reason in that, and in a weird way, like, I also understand why people get so excited when they see this stuff, because unfortunately, most of the community has been starved and fucked around so much that, like, it's kind of depressing to see that, you know, people get excited for stuff that should have been out day one. Granted, I guess it's better late than never, but it's just not in a good state. And again, I think that there's a lot of stuff that should have happened between now and then. Like, trust me, I get it, plans change. Hey, maybe they bit off more than they could chew originally. If they would have just said, like, hey, look, it's going to take us maybe a couple of years to get this stuff out, or maybe like over a year to get this stuff out, instead of just saying like, oh yeah, you know, year one. If they had at least come out and just said like, hey, look, it's going to take us 2 years to get this out, I would have been cool with that. Because at least if they would have also followed up with it and gotten it out, hey, sorry it took a little bit longer, but it's, it actually kind of reminds me of something weirdly that like Gordon Ramsay said. My wife and I, we've been rewatching all of Kitchen Nightmares, but one of the comments that he made was, I can't remember the restaurant, but essentially, you know, the chefs, they were trying to rush everything out and they were getting really, really sloppy. But he said something that I think is really true, that like, people will wait for quality. Like, if you give us something that is of quality in that, that will remove any sort of, you know, like, bad taste that's left in people's mouths. Now, of course, within like a reasonable time frame, right? Like, if they would have said, hey, campaign DLC, we're not going to be able to get it out as early as what we thought, but we are going to keep it coming, it's 6 months delayed, that to me sounds a hell of a lot better than we've just straight up abandoned. Same thing with stuff in the multiplayer as well. If they would have just come out and said like, you know, look, we're gonna, you know, we're not happy with the stuff that we've gotten out or that we've designed, we think we could do better, I would have been cool with that. Hey, take your time. Again, I was willing to do it whenever they first, you know, said that this game was going to be delayed. I would have been willing to do it as well. You know, if they would have just been open and honest and had good communication, instead of any time, you know, something didn't go their way, it just turned into, we're just not going to do it whatsoever. Now, as negative as I've been sounding kind of during this part of the video here, I do want to say, do I have fun with Halo Infinite? Yes, absolutely. You know, I've been out here grinding Firefight while I kind of wait patiently for the next Space Marine 2 update to come out. Again, being on console, not able to access the public test server, but that's all right, you know. I just get to experience it the way the God Emperor intended. But anyways, yeah, I mean, I have had a good time with this. You know, it is something where I can fire it up, play it with my friends and that. I will be honest, at this point, I really don't have any interest in the PvP side of it. Skill-based matchmaking, even with social stuff and that, it just makes everything way too sweaty. But at least I can sit here, play with people in the community, this stuff, and have a relatively good time. Now, I would say, though, that Firefight is something that, you know, I will eventually get bored with, and I probably will take another probably couple month break from this game. And to me, that's okay. You know, I would rather have those short little bursts of fun than just completely turn negative and, you know, hate a franchise that means so much to me. But what I do want to kind of leave this video on is maybe a little bit of a more positive note. Do I feel that Halo is done and over with? Absolutely not. I don't feel that we're in a good spot with it, but I also don't feel that this game is past, or I shouldn't say this game, but this franchise is completely done and over with. I do think that there is hope with it. Again, I do feel that, you know, outside of the leadership, I do feel like there are a lot of really good people at 343 that have good ideas. 343, Microsoft, Halo Studios, whoever the fuck you want to call them, they have to be willing to let those people shine. And I think if they do that, they're going to get a quality product. Again, you know, we've seen from X343 employees a lot of stuff that was going on in the background, stuff that had been planned and worked on that, you know, really came down to leadership that it got stopped. I think that's going to be the big thing is from us in the community is we got to really encourage them to follow through with, you know, letting their employees create a masterpiece. Because I'll be honest with you in that, you know, as much as I give the Forge community credit, I'll be honest, in the past, a lot of that stuff, to me, that was just icing on the cake. And that's truthfully what I felt it should be is, you know, I feel like it should be on the developer to give me something that I really, really, really love. And then after that, you know, have the Forgers build off of what's already great. I don't feel like it should be on the Forgers and that to clean up a shit sandwich just to make it palatable. But again, I do think that, you know, as a community, we should be incredibly grateful to the Forge workers in that, especially because, look, for a lot of this, these guys, they haven't been compensated for their time. It's been a labor of love. And while, yes, it is a labor of love in that, you know, that's time out that they could, you know, people are taking time out of their day to build stuff for us just because they enjoy a game. And, you know, times aren't exactly easy right now for a lot of us. I'm sure, you know, maybe just having a couple bucks for, you know, something that you really, really love, it would probably mean the world to a lot of these guys. But again, I don't feel that, you know, we're too far gone. I do feel like it is fixable in that. I just think that ultimately it comes down to, as the community, we got to continue to express our concerns with the franchise, how we want to see it progress forward. And I think we got to find a good way of doing it. Because I know a lot of times with stuff like this, it's very easy for, you know, people to start making threats, stuff like that. That's not going to want to make people fix issues. But I think we do have to figure out a way as a community in that to communicate it to, you know, just all the higher ups in general. Like, how can we get this game back on track? Or not even this game, like I said, just this franchise in general. Because it's a huge universe. There's a lot of really good stuff about it. I just don't want to see it go out like I just did right there. Run and hide. But yeah, that's just kind of my take on it. Like I said, to me, this game, there is good to it, but there's also a lot of bad. And I feel that if this game would have just got the love and support that we were initially promised, we would have had something amazing by now. And I think that's truthfully what hurts the most, is knowing what could have been with this game and what we got. But that's all from me. Feel free to like, subscribe, all that other fun stuff. I appreciate you all as always, and we will catch you next time.